There are a lot of reasons to collect UFC Strike moments. Maybe you're a fan of specific fighters, so those are the moments you collect. Maybe you're a fan of a specific fighting style, so those are the moments you actually target. But if you're someone like me, you're a bit of a speculator. You want to target moments from fighters that you think have positive futures, that are going to be big in the sport. And there are two ways to get big in the UFC. The first of which is success, right? Fighters that are finding their way closer and closer to a title shot and may eventually win a championship. And there's also fame, fighters who have that certain something that grabs the attention of the fans and creates a massive following of those particular individuals. And today I'm going to go over 10 specific fighters that I think you should target, at least I have, because I think they have not only bright futures, but could become famous as well. I'm going to give you 5, and the first 5 are the fighters that I'm a real personal fan of. These are fighters that I'm not only targeting because I think they have bright futures, but also because I'm just a fan, right? I think they're the real deal. And then the second 5, these are fighters that I may not be a huge fan of, but I do see them having very strong futures in the UFC. Let's get into it. My 5 personal favorites begins with 3-time NCAA Division I wrestling champion, Bo Nickal. Bo Nickal is relatively new to mixed martial arts. He's 5-0, but all 5 finishes have happened in the first round. He has yet to see the second round. He's got 2 wins in UFC, plus a couple of wins in Dana White's Contender Series, and a win in Jorge Masvidal's Icon promotion. So he's been on big events. He's been on the biggest stage, and he's just steamrolled his opponents. But it's that wrestling pedigree that has me believing in him in the future. That's what's really got me thinking Bo Nickal will be a superstar in this sport. Next up on my list of personal favorites is Shavkat Rakhmonov. Shavkat is 17-0, so obviously more experienced than the previous Bo Nickal I'd mentioned. But he's only had 5 fights in UFC, and granted, all 5 fights were finishes. He has not gone the distance in a UFC contest. In fact, all of his wins, all 17 wins, are finishes. Not once has a Shavkat Rakhmonov fight gone the distance. And unlike Bo Nickal as well, this isn't a specialist. Shavkat Rakhmonov is good absolutely everywhere. He is a very feared contender in the UFC octagon. Let's just say that Kamaru Usman has gone on record as saying he will not fight Shavkat Rakhmonov unless it's for a title. And keep in mind, Usman is no longer the title holder. So who knows if they'll ever fight, because he wants no part of Shavkat. Realistically, no one does. And his next opponent, Kelvin Gastelum, is only stepping up because he's got to earn some street cred after being knocked around by a few of the UFC veterans after going toe-to-toe with Israel Adesanya for a full 5 rounds and actually having him in trouble a couple of times. So Kelvin Gastelum is no joke, but I don't think he's a real test for Shavkat. You'll see in September when they fight. Hopefully nothing happens and this fight goes on. But you'll see Shavkat put on another show against a true veteran. Will this go the distance? Maybe for the first time it will, but I'm betting it won't. He's that good. Next up is Alex Pereira. And Alex Pereira is best known for his fights with Israel Adesanya, both the kickboxing fights and, of course, the fights inside the octagon. And inside the octagon, they're 1-1, and Izzy got the better of him last time. Although during that fight, it wasn't that long, but there were times where it looked like Izzy could have gotten knocked out. So if they fight again, who knows which way it's going to go. But they may never fight again, because now he's fighting at light heavyweight, and I think he's actually a true light heavyweight. I think middleweight's a bit much for him to get down to. So his next fight's with Blachowicz, and because Jamal Hill has vacated the title due to an Achilles tendon tear, which I know what that's like, it's possible that fight will be for the light heavyweight strap, which means we could have ourselves a 2-division champion in Alex Pereira. So right now is a great time to snatch up his moments for sure. If you're in a UFC Strike, now is the time to strike. He is a true striker, let's get this straight, right? He is a devastating striker with unbelievable power, but he is so strong that even though he's not a true grappler, I think he can handle himself on the mats as well, and maybe we'll get a chance to see that against Blachowicz. So speaking of the ground game, it brings me to the next fighter on my list, and that's Hamza Shimayev. Hamza made an impression right away in the UFC with his brash, trash-talking, and his total confidence in what he can do inside the octagon. Now, I think that confidence was shaken a bit because he's ripped through everybody. Right now, he's 12-0, but there's 11 finishes and 1 decision. And that decision came against Gilbert Burns, who definitely had him in trouble in the second round of that particular contest. And I think that's humbled him a little bit and maybe forced him to refocus on what he can do outside of the grappling, right? He got beaten striking in that particular contest. So I think Hamza comes back with a vengeance, and an improved Hamza Shimayev is dangerous for everyone. He shouldn't be fighting at welterweight. I think he's a true middleweight, and in fact, he missed his last weight when he fought Kevin Holland. So him at middleweight is a dangerous proposition for a division that's full of a lot of strikers that might not be able to handle what he brings into the octagon. Definitely get yourself some Hamza Shimayev. Which brings me to one of my personal favorites right now, and some of you already know who this is going to be if you follow the channel, and that's Jack Della Maddalena. He's now 15-2. He just had that wicked fight with Basil Havez. Came out the victor. It was a split decision, but honestly, it should have been. It should have been unanimous. He won rounds 2 and 3 relatively easily. But I expect him to even be more impressive in his next fight, because what people aren't factoring in here is that basically both fighters took that fight on short notice. Della Maddalena was supposed to fight the previous week. He cut weight. His fight got canceled. And within a week, had to cut weight again. That's brutal. If he didn't have to cut weight a second time, if this fight happened last week, he would have slept Havez. He would have continued his run of finishes, which is 4 in the UFC, plus this now victory against Havez. Plus, he also had a victory in the Contender Series previous to that. But look for his next fight to be a special one. I'm all about Jack Della Maddalena. So let's move on to the 5 fighters that I think have great futures in the UFC, but aren't necessarily my favorites. And it begins with the future, Ian Garry. Ian Garry's 12-0. He's 5-0 in the UFC. He's got 3 finishes in the UFC along with a couple of decisions. But he hasn't shown me enough yet to really say whether or not he's a title contender. Although his next fight, which is coming up soon, against Jeff Neal, will say something as to whether or not this guy is legit. Because Jeff Neal is no joke. Although he did lose by submission to Shavkat Rakhmonov. Of course, another guy on my list. But Jeff Neal is no joke, and coming off a loss, he's going to be very dangerous, and he's got that knockout power. Ian Garry is strong and built for the division, so we'll get a chance to see if he can withstand the kind of punishment Neal's sure to unleash on him. That'll be the real test as to whether or not this guy is legit. I believe he is. I don't know if he'll get a finish, but don't be surprised if he gets a decision. Looking forward to it. Next up is a true veteran of the octagon. He's 23-3. It's Bilal Muhammad. And Bilal Muhammad's on a 9-fight win streak in the octagon. His last loss came back in 2019 against Jeff Neal, of all people, so there's that name again. And his most recent win came against Gilbert Burns. So there's another fighter we've mentioned already. But Bilal Muhammad deserves a title shot. And the funny thing is that he has had a fight against Leon Edwards, the current title holder, only that ended with a no contest due to eye poke. So it's about time they got back in there and they settled this. And he's due. He's really due. He's going to get his shot soon, and don't be surprised if he's the one that walks out with the belt. I really like Bilal Muhammad. I like what he brings into the cage, and it's about time we saw him fight for a title. Next up, we've got a true mixed martial artist. This guy is good everywhere in the natural Caio Borralho. Now, Caio Borralho is 14-1. His only loss came way back at the beginning of his career in 2015. Since then, he's just been dominant. He's 4-0 in the UFC, plus he's got a couple of additional wins in the Dana White's Contender Series. But what I like about Caio is that he's somewhat unassuming, although he's built like a superhero, but he doesn't go into fights with a lot of hype really, although I'm certain that's going to change relatively soon. The thing about him is that you never really know what he's going to do because he's so good everywhere, right? He can submit you. He can knock you out. He can just outpower you. His decisions have usually come down to his opponent hanging on at the end and trying not to get submitted, but just dominated the whole way through, or finishing all bloodied up because he's just pounded them with some serious ground and pound. So I like Kyle Bario. I want to see him face tougher competition, and I'm sure that's happening soon. But until then, I still like him as a future prospect here. I'm just not 100% sure on him yet. So let's wait and see. Next up, El Matador Ilia Tapia. And Ilia Tapia has just been dominant over his last few fights in the UFC. He's 14-0, and he's 6-0 in the UFC. This guy's undefeated, and he just looks better and better. His last few wins, especially that last one against Josh Emmett, showed you how exceedingly skilled he can be and how impressively powerful he is when necessary. So he had opportunities to take Emmett out in that particular fight, but he had learned from the Jai Herbert fight where he had found himself get clocked a little bit when he overextended, and he was patient. He could have finished him. I really think he could have, but better to be safe, get the win, and look for that title shot because let's be honest, he deserves it. And it's what he wants. But I've already told you in previous videos I've shot that I think Alex Volkanovski is going to move up to lightweight. And if so, maybe Tapia gets a shot for the vacant belt against somebody, maybe Max Holloway. Who knows? I'm just hoping he gets a title shot soon. Although I would like to see him face somebody in the top 5 once more before that happens, just because he's spoiling us with these performances. Ilia Tapia is the real deal. And the last fighter on my list is actually a personal favorite. It was difficult for me not to put him in my favorites list, but it's because he hasn't fought for over a year, and he's dealing with injuries, and that's Yuri Prochazka. Yuri Prochazka is 29-3, okay? His last loss came back in 2015. He's only had 3 fights in the UFC, but those 3 fights were against Volkan Ozdemir, Dominic Reyes, and Glover Teixeira. And of course, Glover Teixeira was for the light heavyweight belt, which he won. The only reason he's not the light heavyweight champion now is due to injury. But he's one of the most exciting fighters to watch. And although his style leaves a lot to be desired defensively, his offense is so effective that he finds ways to win. He's an exciting fighter in the cage. And I expect on his return, he may be even better. As long as he has a full recovery, which I believe, given the time frame, he will, he'll also have time to kind of work out some of the kinks in his game, some of the weak spots, hopefully, in his defense. And I expect to see an even better Yuri Prochazka when he returns to reclaim his light heavyweight championship. Just looking forward to it. Definitely one of the UFC Strike moments you're going to want to have in your collection.